Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the aBlogtoWatch Superlative Podcast. Before we get started, I want to remind you to listen to our other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly. Today, my guest is Patrik Hoffmann. He is the chairman and CEO of Favre Leuba. That is your latest and most interesting career move. Patrik, welcome.
Well, thank you, Ariel. Thank you for having me.
Over the years, you've been on a variety of, I'll call them podcasts. Sometimes they've just been explanatory videos. I remember back when you were the person in charge of Ulysse Nardin, we used to sit there and chat about technical things, right? We would explain how a movement system works. And a lot of people, this is funny, a lot of people got to know you through those videos originally, right? There's no podcast really, but here was the CEO of a luxury watch brand talking about how an automatic winding system works or something like that, or silicon. You remember those chats we used to have?
Sure, absolutely. And it started even before when I was my times with Ulysse, when mechanical watches started to come into the play and nobody wanted to go back. And Ulysse was one of the first ones. Yeah, so we had to first explain how a mechanical movement works and the difference between a hand winding movement and an automatic movement. Exactly.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed in interviewing the great CEOs of the watch industry today, and you're fortunate to be among that list, is that many of you had oftentimes more than one, but at least one really good mentor. And I think that you had multiple of them. But I think one of the interesting mentors that you had, and looking back on it, I think it's obviously was interesting, was Rolf Schneider at Ulysse Nardin. You took over after he passed away, which made sense. But I think that what was interesting about Rolf is he was a showman. And you never really would think about it, but now that you look at the success of the luxury watch industry, you recognize those brands, models, leaders that are most successful are visionaries, but also showmen. And I'm just wondering if you could tell people that never knew anything about Rolf, maybe a couple of things about him, because, you know, there's not a lot of videos out there about him. He's kind of, if you didn't know him, it's a bit of a mystery, actually.
I kind of disagree with you on the showman. Really? I don't see it like this. Yes, I was asked, but particularly after his decease, I was asked, people said he was an entrepreneur. He was a product man. He was a leader. I heard all those. And then I said, I have to put it down to one sentence. In my opinion, he had balls. He had guts. That's really, I think it all went down to that, And
I guess maybe showman can have a negative connotation where depending on where you come from in the world. In Los Angeles, that's a good thing.
Yes, I know. But I think he didn't search the limelight like some other CEOs do. And I think this is something which I appreciate about him as well, because what I always say is when you're a manager, when you're a CEO, you're actually nothing more than a manager. You take care of something which doesn't belong to you in most cases. And what that is like is CEOs who treat the people or who behave like they would be the owner of a company. And Rolf Schneider, it was different. He owned the company. And he made some really bold decisions. And we would sit in a meeting room and he would make a bold decision and we would all say, you are crazy. And at the end of the day, we had to say, you know what? This is your company. This is your money. You're not playing with investors' money. It's your decision. Let's go for it.
So, okay, if that's not a showman, what would you call that? I mean, I know you said he has balls, but try to think of more of an adjective. It's more than courage. It's a little bit more than courage.
It was more than, he was a true entrepreneur, because he was the first in many things. Because many people don't know he was producing dials and hands and escapements in Asia. He was the first one actually producing parts in Asia for the Swiss watch industry. That's how he came into the watch business.
I didn't know that. I guess that makes sense. Well, you would agree that with Ulysse Nardin, he took a brand that, of course, he didn't start, but he made it his own. He obviously kept a lot of it alive, but he kind of made it his own, didn't he?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's all his handwriting. I really, he put his heart into it. It was his life. I think it was his first wife. Let's put it this way. That's what it was. I think his today widow. She was sometimes jealous. I can tell because his first wife was Ulysse Nardin. And it didn't take off that easily, It was probably, I would say, 12 to 13 years into the venture until he really found the direction. I think he was searching, or the company, the management was searching. And it really kicked off, I would say, in 1995, 1996. That's when they got the grasp in which direction the company should go.
I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is because now, with your leadership of Favre Leuba, I see a parallel opportunity. You're taking a brand that you didn't start, that's had a few lives before, and you get to take it in a completely Patrik direction, which is hard, but I think at this part of your career, maybe one of the most exciting things that you can do, right?
I think so. I'm old now. I call myself, I'm quite old, so it's probably a disadvantage and an advantage. I think it's really now that part of the career where I can look back and I can work with relationships and with experience. So it's really, I have a lot of drawers I can just pull. And I don't think I need to put on a show. You said you see the handwriting of Patrik. And if I would like to play or portray something which I'm not, I don't think we could be successful.
I guess when I say show, what I really refer to is a watch which is just more than a boring timepiece. The watch has to be itself almost like a entertainment production with beauty and whimsy and mystery and novelty and poetry. Because we know that all those extra elements are necessary, because we talk about this a lot on the show. Qualitatively speaking, most of what the Swiss watch industry produces is a good watch. So it's some extra thing that sells it. And that extra can't come from marketing meetings or analysis. It's got to come from that one individual. It sometimes is the leader, sometimes the designer. It was, as we agree, Rolf during that period of life at Ulysse Nardin. And now, it's you.
Yeah, and I think a lot has to do with your guts again. It's the feeling which you have. And there's one word which I learned when I lived in the States. And of course, English is not my mother tongue. I had to learn it. That was the word whimsical. And I started to search what is really whimsical, because I heard the name and I had no idea what it meant. And
that's a hard concept.
The product has to be, whimsical is probably the wrong word, but the product always has to be a bit edgy. Or you have to have a certain part of your line or of your collection which is a bit edgy. And I think now with Favre Leuba, what we launched was not so edgy yet, because I think even there we have to find the way. And I think the key now is not to shoot all ammunition at the first. We have to build the brand up. And the ideas which we have, or I have, are incredible. But again, you have to build it up.
A lot of people admire the relaunch. Just a couple of weeks ago, you and I met in person in Geneva. Favre Leuba relaunched for, I don't know, third, fourth time, whatever it is. Brand new collection. Very prolific so far, but people said, you know what? He has a marketable collection. These are interesting watches, but digestible watches, understanding that more will come. What was your thinking in doing it this way, where you said, let's do some sellable stuff first. Let's be very commercial and marketable. Figure out what the market wants. Figure out what we're good at. Tell me a little bit about that thought process, because many people go the other way. They're like, we're going to come out with some crazy product first and then dub it down after 5 models.
I had some talks with a designer actually 2 days ago, not related to Favre Leuba. And at some stage, that designer said, it has to be different. We don't want to be like everybody else. It has to be completely unique what I'm doing, not related to what I'm doing. And I had to say to him, at the end of the day, you have to be careful because the uniqueness has to be there, but the uniqueness might not pay your salary. At the end of the day, you have to think commercial. Now, to use the word commercial is maybe not so sexy. Let's put it this way. But we really, when we put Favre Leuba together, we said it has to be an active timepiece, a wearable timepiece, and it has to be commercial. And that's really
that means
what we
sellable.
put into the
To
mission.
people that don't know, that's what we're talking about. When we say sellable, it's I've been in the market. I'm speaking as you. I know generally what consumers like and don't like. I want to come up with some watches that I feel confident the market wants to buy right now. That's what we mean by commercial.
Exactly. And I'm not an architect. I'm not even a watchmaker. I'm a commercial guy. That's my background. So for me, it was clear in that case, that's what we want to do. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to bring some timepieces which are maybe not so sellable. Because again, you have to tell a story. You have to build up a story, and you're going to do things which are not just commercial. We need pieces which are not just commercial.
Absolutely. And you have, and I want to talk about intuition a little bit more in this conversation, but being where you have, especially Ulysse and Nardin, and people may not realize that when you were there, the brand started with watches priced at just a few $1,000s, and they went up to over $1 million. The range of watches that were made by the brand then was enormous. You were able to develop such a broad intuition about what sells at all levels, right? Not just $1 million gem set, crazy complicated watches, but also just a daily wear sports watch. And that intuition, I think, is what develops over time in this industry, and why maturity is a really valuable thing. So you sort of joke that you're old, but like you have the maturity to have the intuition where it's actually worth paying you to do this.
Yeah, that's true. And the investors are also believing in this, I guess, But I think what is also important, your intuition is one thing, but you have to meet people. You have to be in the market. And I always say, when you sit in your office, and even if you read the internet now where you get basically everything, you have to meet people, you have to meet suppliers, you have to meet watchmakers, because, I don't get all the intuition and the ideas, not at all. I get it from other people. I have to get things together, and sometimes I have a talk with a watchmaker who sits at the bench all day long, and it clicks, and an idea comes up.
Yeah, because you have to speak to the people that are actually building the product. You need to know what's hot today, what they're into, because ultimately they're the people on the ground level of making these tools. And if you need to know to trust them. And I think that actually very few of the CEOs spend as much technical time with the staff as they should, right?
Oh, for sure. Probably they don't have the time, or it's maybe not the fun part of it. But that's really where we built Ulysse Nardin. And I think the value proposition of Favre Leuba is also there, because I'm meeting suppliers and producers non-stop. That's really also where you get new ways, because sometimes those sub-suppliers, they have ideas, but they're maybe not yet commercial. And you have maybe CEOs, they say, no, I don't want to do that first. I want to see what happens first. The great example is silicium. People didn't believe in it at the beginning. People gave up. And all of a sudden, now, it's part of watchmaking. And for that, you have to have some trust and, again, some courage.
So some context here. Again, I want to spend a lot of time talking about Favre Leuba, but again, Ulysse Nardin did some amazing things while you were there. In the early 2000s, you come out with a Freak, which the whole point was a movement made as much of silicon as possible. And watchmakers, some of the traditionalists were like, this is not a watch. How dare you? And they would do all this horrible nonsense. You could never fix this. This isn't traditional watchmaking. And they just laid on the conservatism. And then within several years, you got Swatch Group, Patek Philippe, Rolex, all investing in silicon, using it. And then out of the blue, the Freak becomes this iconic legend. And you're like, guys, we called it the Freak. Like, stop forgetting the name.
Exactly, which even at that time, people said you're completely crazy to call a timepiece for that price. We started at $28,000, I remember. They said, how can you call a $28,000 watch a freak?
Well, you did.
But yeah, we did, yes. And sometimes you can look back and then you laugh and you were successful. And sometimes you make mistakes as well.
So let's talk about getting started with Favre Leuba. You have this opportunity to relaunch this historic brand. Remind me, what is the original year of the brand?
1737.
1737. Wow.
And of course,
so
it said it's the second oldest brand, but I think it's better to just say it's one of the oldest brands. I think it's much better.
It's one of the oldest brands.
Yeah.
What was your sense? What did you want to do? What was your intuition about where to take this company? I do want to hear what your favorite parts of the history are, but also before that, you're the business guy. You're like, okay, I want to make something of this. I want to have a commercial brand. I want to sell. I want to appeal to people. What did your instinct tell you to do?
Okay, so I was approached by a group of people who knew my background of selling Ulysse, who knew my background of helping to purchase Derbeton. And I was in some other deals, so I became a little bit, not a specialist, but involved in M&A. And Favre Leuba came to me and I just said, Favre Leuba, and I remembered some of the CEOs. I remembered what happened over the last 20 years. It meant nothing to me. So I really had to go and look into it. It was not something where I said, oh, this is really something great. I had to put my head into it. Now, there are a few aspects which intrigue me. One is Favre Leuba was always in business. Okay, they were always there. Then, the more I digged into the history, it started to remind me more and more on my career start with Oris. It kind of put me back to them. So that was one thing. Then, of course, the history. And every CEO of the past of Favre Leuba was telling the story of the history and how great it is, the DNA, and which is we can pull from. But then also I looked at the commercial part. And there are certain pockets in the world where the brand has an enormous recognition. And I knew that I'm going to get some partners which will give me already a momentum from the beginning. Because you have to have a security on the commercial part. And the backup from the financial guys who are behind it is there. So we can invest, and we invested everything or most of it now into the product. So I saw the commercial opportunity. And I saw it's a brand where you can take the past and we can continue that path, but really looking forward. We have to make sure, and I knew it, we can put the signature into that brand, which will show the direction which we are going to go very quickly. And I think we were able to do that in terms of product. So yes, here I am. And then I said, okay, I'll take that venture. I'm going to help the staff to build it up as the chairman. I'm going to spend 50% of my time into this. And of course, it turned out completely different, because once you really, I call it now, fall in love, you have to put your whole heart into it. And now 100% of my time and of my heart is in that brand.
You mentioned before that you were planning on retiring and that this project essentially changed those plans. What does it take? I mean, when someone actually can afford the ability to say, I'm retiring, that's a rare thing today. What does it take, I guess, emotionally to say, no, I'm gonna go back and work? And is this a different type of thing where, yes, it's your full-time thing, but are you doing it maybe in a more relaxed way because you want to do it differently? I'm just wondering if this is a job that you got to make up how you operate it.
Okay, so now this is the second attempt, because I really retired in 2017 after I left Ulysse, because that gave me the opportunity, as you say, the luxury to say that and do that. I didn't do it. I did something completely different. I learned a lot. It was already still in the watch business, Now I'm back. I'm really back on where I was probably 30 years ago. And I don't do it in a more relaxed way. Yes, I'm maybe not so nervous about certain things, but to be honest, I don't want this project to fail. Because when I look back at my career, I think I can look back, I didn't make too many mistakes. It was quite all right what I did. I don't want this to fail. That means I have to put more than 100% into it. And I don't take this in a relaxed way. Not at all.
Okay, so this is an energized Patrik. This is a very motivated Patrik. Now, you mentioned that you didn't want to fail, which is good. Nobody wants their venture to fail. But you're relaunching a brand at a precarious time in the world. The watch market is there and it's operating, but it's not growing right now because of a lot of issues beyond its control. Demand for watches is very high. What is unfamiliar to you about this environment? Because I feel that while there's, of course, a lot of things that happen in the watch industry, it's all cyclical. There are some unique things right now that no one in a few lifetimes has ever experienced. And I'm wondering what feels totally like the unknown right now in the industry for you.
I don't want to sound arrogant. I think the biggest challenge today, or really what changed if I look back 30 years ago, is the communication. Communication moves so fast. And if you make a mistake or you do a launch, and a successful one or a non-successful one somewhere in the world, it is all over the place. You are being watched from 1 second to the other of what you're doing. I mean, that launch or the relaunch in Geneva Watch Days, it was global, even though it happened in a small event in Geneva. I think this is new, which means changes will come much faster than they used to come. And you see brands, not only in the watch industry, which are so successful, and it's almost like a light switch, and it changes almost overnight. So I would say, I know it all, but it changes much faster. And that's maybe part where I would say, I'm a little bit afraid that it's new land for me, but I cannot change.
Where's the arrogance? I totally missed all that.
No, because the arrogance is I say I haven't seen it all. I have seen it all, I mean, those ups and downs I have seen. And the market will come back. And yes, product will change. And I think the watch industry is making some mistakes, which they will regret in the future. There's one part really which bothers me. And maybe now, as I think, this is one part which is really unknown and which is new and which is, in my opinion, not developing into the right direction. And if I can mention that, what I see, of course, is the average price is going up. It means less and less product is being produced, but the value is going up. So we are talking now about export going up from 19 billion to 27 billion in 4 years. It's great. But at the same time, the volume is going down. And that bothers me. And most CEOs I talk to, they don't agree with me with that assessment. But I believe you need a strong production. You need industry behind it. If you only go for the luxury, I think it's a mistake. And I think that is something which we have to watch carefully in the watch industry.
So it may be the fact that other CEOs don't agree with you, but you know who agrees with you? The consumer. The consumer actually wants value retention. So it's not true that the consumer wants these things to be cheap or as inexpensive as possible. But value for money has been the number one rallying cry, I think, of the consumer population today. It's we want value for money, whatever that is. And you described something interesting is that a lot of these Swiss brands can just increase their retail price and then be like, oh, our exports are going up. Wait a minute, you just valued your own currency. You're not allowed to just do that. And so you're right. They're making these decisions of all of a sudden, I feel like my watches are worth more just because I said so. I'm going to charge more for it. And on the fashion side, companies have been absolutely lampooned for this. Burberry, Chanel, I remember with their handbags, they doubled the price? They literally doubled the price. Something that was cost $3,000 suddenly cost $6,000, and people just flipped out. And Chanel's like, it costs us more to make. It's like, what are you, out of your minds? Isn't the whole point that as time goes on, you find more efficiencies? You don't find less efficiencies? You just double everyone's salaries, and then that's how business works. No, that's silly. So I think that these CEOs are in the minority. This is wishful thinking. They're living a bit in a bubble, and I think you actually understating that this is a dangerous thing. This is not just a bad decision. This is absolutely catastrophically dangerous for certain brands because they're no longer selling to the same demographic.
I think there are two aspects to it. I see two aspects to it. One is the consumer. We forget, again, what you say, we sometimes live in a bubble. If a consumer spends 2,000 Swiss francs or $2,000 on a timepiece, that consumer has to work to spend those $2,000. And I think we forget that sometimes because sometimes we are used to sell timepieces for 100,000 and 200,000 Swiss francs or US dollars, which is probably easy money. But somebody who has pleasure and passion for a 2,000 timepiece, Swiss franc timepiece, has to work for it. That's one aspect. And
Absolutely.
Then the other aspect is you have the people working on the workbench. And we should never forget about those, because you need people who produce those timepieces. And if at the end all that know-how is gone, even on the industrial level, there is also know-how needed on the industrial level, we are losing out. Where is the future going to go? We need those people. We need the know-how, we need the machinery and the industry in Switzerland.
What do you think are some of the things that you'd want to say to these CEOs? I mean, you have a good track record of having insight. Tell them why it's a bad idea. Tell them why just indiscriminately raising prices very, very quickly is just a bad idea in the mid or to long term.
You just said it. I think you have to have a long-term thinking. I think the long-term thinking has gone. Because most CEOs, of course, they report to a board or they report to investors. So the long-term thinking is gone, and it always bites you back. If you do a mistake, at some stage it will bite you back. Because how long can you pull there and push? And I think the industry has to learn, and I think the CEOs have to learn, and I think the message is clear, and one example is China. Everybody was running for China because it was just so low-hanging fruits, and some people lost focus because all the focus was only on China. And now all of a sudden that cash cow is not there anymore, and people are becoming nervous.
Maybe you actually read. I don't know. I mean, there's so much stuff. I don't assume that you read it all. But just a couple of weeks ago, I published an essay that was basically saying that I was challenging this conventional wisdom about the fact that prices should always be going up. So, ironically, I was talking about this, and it's reassuring that this is also for you the top problem which is happening right now. Yet it is so rarely discussed, and it's sort of this sort of emperor's new clothes situation where internally at the company, a CEO or a marketing team will raise prices and people clap, they're like, oh, bravo. Oh, such a wise move. But the reality is someone needs to be like, hey, jerk, what are you doing? This doesn't make any sense. This isn't the way to grow your business. This isn't supposed to work in real life. Why are you doing this?
Well, when I studied in the States at some stage and we talked about sales and marketing, it was always the focus has to be on the consumer. And if you just produce what the consumer doesn't want or the product is not fair, at some stage it's going to bite you. And I always mention the same product, and I don't eat it myself. But if you take a product like McDonald's, the value proposition is probably there. Okay, and I'm not talking about the health, but people know what they can expect. And I think it's important in the watch industry as well that a consumer knows from a brand what he or she can expect. for the money he or she spends on it.
I want to boil down, if I can, the majority of consumer complaints, right? So I've read, either personally sent to me on the aBlogtoWatch website, throughout all these places, complaints that consumers have had about Swiss brands. And they all kind of boil down to the same complaint. That's this. I want your opinion on this. Hey, watch brand, why do you hate us consumers so much? That's the complaint, right? It just boils down to that. Whether it's service, which is taking too long or too expensive, or they were treated poorly at a store. But it really boils down to, all I'm trying to do is in good faith see if I want to spend money with you. And you clearly hate me. Why do you hate me?
But think about that. How bad that is, what you just said. You know? And that brings me to another topic. And I know we want to talk about Favre Leuba, but you have consumers now. Sometimes I say, I think consumers want to be treated badly. I sometimes have that feeling. I mean, if people have to queue in front of a shop for a bag or a watch for 30, 40, 50,000 Swiss francs and get treated really bad because they get it allocated, where is the luxury? I don't see this as a luxury. I mean, I want to be treated fairly. And I think at some stage, the consumer is going to change again. I think at some stage, the consumer doesn't want to be on a waiting list. Waiting list is maybe not bad, but being treated badly. Both doesn't
I'll
work.
explain that psychology. You're right. I don't wait in lines for stuff. And if I figure if a company wants my money, they'll work for it. But the psychology is this. In essence, the consumer was told online, mainly online through media, that buying this product makes you happy. They don't know anything more than other people want it. And they're like, wait a minute. But all these people have somehow come to the conclusion that this product makes them happy. Maybe it'll make me happy. So they're standing in line for no better reason than, hey, I was told this is going to make me happy. It's it. It's actually not more complicated than that.
Okay, so it's the old story of advertising then.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And people buy watches to feel good. I mean, we know this. I like to say that they use it to celebrate themselves. But that's sort of this interesting, I guess you could say, utility that it serves a lot of wearers. Is yes, it tells them the time, but it's there to make them feel good. And how it makes them feel good, of course, can vary. But that's ultimately what these things do.
Well, that's not a bad thing. I mean, that is not a bad thing at
No.
all. I think the bad thing is, and I even say if you have to be on a waiting list, that's maybe not the worst. But if you get treated badly, that is something which I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, waiting list is fine as long as it's not years and years and years, and you are supposed to save $100,000 and not spend it for all that time for some crazy thing that is too expensive usually. Yeah. Okay, so I want you to tell a little bit more of the Favre Leuba story. What exactly was going back on in the brand in 1737? Like, how does obviously it evolved? It totally changed, but people wonder, like, what does a watch company look like in the 18th century?
Well, first of all, it started in local, which brings me again back to where I worked at some stage.
Yeah.
It was not just one person. It always needs more people. And in the Favre family, it was different people who got involved. First, it was a watchmaker. At the end, it was in 1737, it became a brand. And of course, what we forget, it was always pocket watches at that time. And the watches came essentially from pocket watches and from clocks. And the story of Favre Leuba, of course, is kind of intriguing because Favre Leuba was always very soon involved with other watch brands. So they would produce for other watch brands. And Favre Leuba had a story which brought them into different markets, explore markets, where other brands didn't go in. One example is India. So Favre Leuba was the first Swiss watch brand entering into India. That was in 1865. And at that time, a bit later on, that was then already 1900, Favre Leuba was so strong in that market that other brands used Favre Leuba to enter certain markets. Like, for example, Patek Philippe, Jaeger-LeCoultre, etc. And what happened then in the 60s and 70s, in the last century, was that Favre Leuba really had its heydays. They produced thousands and thousands of timepieces for Zenith, for Bovet, for Jaeger-LeCoultre. Was one of the main producers of Jaeger-LeCoultre watches, and even was helping distribution on the side of Patek Philippe. So I could now, of course, use the word innovation, but it's a word which I don't like to use anymore. So there were certain timepieces where Favre Leuba was in the forefront. Like, for example, in a monopusher, they were one of the first ones. Or in diving watches in the 60s, one of the only ones who believed into that market. Or one thing which I strongly believe in is timepieces with a long power reserve. So it was one of the first ones to produce a long power reserve with a twin barrel. So these kind of innovations are things which I go back. But again, I don't like to use, because I cannot really prove certain things when I say it was the first one, So I'm going away from the first and the second one. It's better to say it was one of the brands which were playing in that field, and again, which had the courage to be a bit innovational there. And I think this is something now which we have to transform into the future.
So let's clarify a bit of the history there. So you talked about Favre Leuba being a supplier in essence, where it was a manufacturing supplier for various important watchmakers. But there were also, of course, timepieces that said Favre Leuba on the dial. I think you should clarify for people that are interested in the history that it served multiple purposes. And of course, they also made their own watches, correct?
Yeah, so it served several purposes. So we have certain timepieces. We have in our collection of about 150 timepieces, historical timepieces, which we can put into I would call it a mini museum. And we find timepieces like, for example, Bovet, co-branded Bovet. Bovet was owned by Favre Leuba in the 40s. So something which people don't know. So there's a history between those two houses, as we would call it. And then was an area where Favre Leuba and Jaeger-LeCoultre was in the same group. It was the so-called CPAC group in the 60s. And Favre Leuba was very strong, industrialized, if I want to call it like this, and produced timepieces for Jaeger-LeCoultre. So in our collection, we will find even Jaeger-LeCoultre reversal timepieces. So there were reversal timepieces sold with that name. So that's one aspect. That was the industrial part and the production part. Now, what I mentioned in terms of Patek Philippe as an example, Favre Leuba was so strong in the Indian market. It's kind of the Tiffany story. So you had Patek Philippe producing timepieces with a stamp of Tiffany on the dial to sell timepieces in New York or in the United States. And the same happened with Favre Leuba. Favre Leuba was a big distributor at the same time, not only their own timepieces. And Patek Philippe used actually Favre Leuba to sell their timepieces in India. So there are different kind of collaborations on the production side and on the distribution side.
In terms of, I guess you could say, design DNA, of course, there's some innovations, as you said, but what are some of the things that if you had to attribute to being the icons, are there particular models, looks, complications? Of course, the bivouac is an important one, but talk about what that is. And just, again, I want people to have just a crash course. And what should I know about vintage Favre Leuba?
I think when we look at Favre Leuba, I could say now, the DNA could be the cushion shape, or the deep blue, the diving watch, or certain areas before, lady pieces, very small, etc., or the monopusher. But again, I think it would be wrong because it would not be the truth. Because if I go back and I do a real deep research, it was other brands at certain times who produced a kind of style. Okay, like in the 60s or towards the end of the 60s, you had the cushion shape coming up. Now, the cushion shape for Favre Leuba is very unique, is a part of the DNA. But then again, I'm probably too honest. If I look into that era, there were other brands who also produced cushion-shaped timepieces. So I couldn't claim now this was typical or only Favre Leuba. But when I really go back, a few things which come to my mind, which I would like to mention, is that cushion shape, which became a kind of a DNA of Favre Leuba, because it was just a strong design. So we really decided to work on that now with the relaunch. Another one or two which I would mention, one is the harpoon and the other one is the bivouac. Those were strong designs from the look, but it came from the inside. And for me, the inside of a timepiece is as important as the look. And if you take the harpoon, it was one of the first timepieces where a twin barrel was introduced in a movement, which gave additional power reserve, which added also to the look of the timepiece. And then, and this is really unique, and here I can say it was the first one, the bivouac in 1962 was the first time that an altimeter was built into a timepiece. And for me, fascinating part, there is a real marketing aspect behind it, because it was a very strong story and it was really used at that time. I mean, we could really copy paste what they did in terms of communication. I could almost call it influencers at that time, because they had people climbing the Everest, and it was talked about. It was the first lady, it was a Japanese lady who climbed the Mount Everest, the first lady to climb the Mount Everest, wearing a bivouac, going down, being caught in an avalanche where a few people actually passed away. She made it. So there are stories, and they were told, and there were a few real famous climbers in Switzerland who went on the Eiger, who went on the Matterhorn, and it was all used in their communication. So we could even learn from that, and even we could cut it, paste it. So that bivouac really became an icon. And for me, it's fascinating. And again, it's something which nobody needs today. You don't need an altimeter when you climb a mountain, because everything you have on a GPS. But then again, it's the passion. It's kind of looking back, something which you used in the past, and you can have fun and a good feel if you use it today.
I'm actually very interested, and no rush, by the way, but how you'll approach both the harpoon and the bivouac, because the previous iteration of Favre Leuba had both of those models that were technically interesting, very interesting technically, but not commercially successful for reasons related to them being big or difficult to understand, a little bit too intellectual. So I'm not asking for any hints. I'm simply just saying to you, I'm actually very curious how you will approach these two models, because the expectations are high, the stakes are high, but these are things that the collector is really going to expect a lot from. So this is a considerable challenge. So I give you good luck, and I just want you to know that I'm I'm looking forward to seeing what you'll come up with. And again, please don't rush it.
No, and I have to tell you, the bivouac I want to rush, because it's so much, it grew to me. And when I talk to people, the pressure came on, because that's the one I hear left and right. I mean, even you mentioned the bivouac first, during this conversation. Yeah. And that is the project which I kicked off the first. And that's going on. And you will see there's something very soon. Very soon means maybe in 14, 18 months. And
oh wow! How do you make that sexy today? How do you take a mechanical barometer basically and make it sexy today? It's just been tried to do. You remember Breva, the weather watch?
Yeah, no, I know. No, I think we have to go back.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is, and you talked about it, and the brief was very clear, and the technicians we work with, the brief is very clear. It has to be wearable. If it's not going to be wearable, we are going to abandon the project. So it has to be wearable, and it's not going to be.
It's funny that in the past the designers didn't get that. They weren't told it has to be wearable. Someone forgot to mention that to them.
I know, but I talked to some of those designers of the last 10 years, and they told me we were told it has to be an instrument. So the brief was different, and I think today when you talk when you talk to an architect, or if you talk to a technician or a watchmaker, and I keep telling this, the brief which you put together on what you want has to be so accurate and so clear. Then you get somewhere, you get what you want, and you can make it affordable. Because if you don't know in which direction you go and you keep searching, it becomes very costly. The development becomes very costly and will take too long. And I learned this.
And that's where your intuition comes in.
Exactly. And I want to go back. You mentioned Rolf Schneider, which was one of my mentors. He also had, again, the courage to pull the plug. Because sometimes you're in with a lot of money already, and you realize it's not the right thing. You have to have the guts to say, I rather pull the plug, write it off, because if I keep going, it becomes a never-ending pain, and it becomes even more costly. And at the end, you have something which is not for the consumer. So sometimes you have to have the guts to pull the plug.
Do you think that too many watches on a regular basis are come out that probably should have been pulled at some point?
Probably, yes. And I think it has to do again with pressure, probably. I think so. And the interesting thing is, and I keep telling this also, we had a lot of talk with the investors when we came out with the collection. And once we had the collection in front of us, I could tell you, this model is going to be number 1, number 2, number 3. This is going to be okay. This style is going to be number 1. And that's why also I always did, to set a price before I sold the product. I always made adjustments in the final price a few days before Baselworld, the Watches and Wonders, always. Because you have to have the product in front of you. And then sometimes you have to make a compromise.
Okay. So I understand. So basically what you're saying is that many instances, the price of the watch should be calculated before someone actually sees the final watch and is able to say, wait a minute, people aren't going to spend this on this.
Yeah. I mean, these are small variations. I'm not talking changing the price from 3,000 to 6,000. You know what I mean? But you might say, okay, the calculation brings me to 3,200. Why should I decide that today for next Watches and Wonders? When I see the watch, I might say, you know what, it's going to be 3,300 or 3,100. These kind of decisions, And you have to.
But it's kind of silly that they're doing that at all. I mean, the idea that you would price something before you actually saw the final thing, that's kind of a damning thing. People don't want to believe that about the industry, yet practices like that happen.
Probably. But then on the other side, you also have to be fair. Eh? And in a brand like Favre Leuba, it's very clear you have a calculation. And you have to do your calculation. At the end of the day, you have to pass on that calculation to the consumer, which is the right thing to do, because then it's fair. Because what you explained before, many times there is some air in there, which the consumer pays, and that's just not fair.
So give consumers a tip. How do they know that a price is fair, whether or not it's high, versus a manager is just like, yeah, that sounds like a great number. Let's go with that. I mean, it's difficult to tell on the outside, right?
I think in general it's difficult, but I'm sure educated consumers, there are certain brands where certain models where you pay a certain price, and part of the price is just, call it the hype factor, or maybe too much marketing or whatever. I mean, that's what it is. But at the end of the day, it's also the consumer that decides. Huh?
Sure, but I think that there's a skepticism, and it goes from healthy to maybe sometimes unwarranted, but I can understand if so many watches have a luxury premium just because somebody wants to make money, it's easy to be very skeptical, because there's a lot of products that just cost a huge amount to make. They're not even making that much on it. It just costs a lot to make that thing. And the consumer sometimes is not empowered to know the difference.
Yeah, and that's why I think you use the right word. The consumer has the right and should be skeptical. And I think this is where the market is changing today as well. I think today's consumer, the new generations, they do more research. They want to know. I think they go and do their research much deeper than maybe a decade ago. And I think that's good.
Yeah.
I think they should test, they should see with whom they work, who is behind the company, what is the true value behind the product. And that's again where the communication today comes in. And I think that's a good thing, because I think they should be skeptical.
I've done some research and I've decided that India is probably going to be a pretty hot market, maybe over the next 5 to 10 years, maybe longer. It's no secret that the financial weight behind Favre Leuba is in India. I'm just curious to know, what is your strategy? Obviously, selling in India is going to be a major part of the brand, obviously. But it's a very dynamic market. It's a changing market. It's an upwardly mobile market. When you, and it's starting, basically very soon, but you start to do business in India, what are you going to do to take advantage of the growth, given the fact that India is different than China, different than Europe, different than North America?
I mean, that's a very straightforward business decision. I mean, you sell your timepieces where the market is, and we are building the market globally. But as you said, India is going to be a major pillar of it. And there we take full advantage, which means we have a very big partner there with many point of sales. So you are going to see Favre Leuba in many point of sales. People will see it's Ethos watches. Yeah, they're going to be the exclusive distributor or retailer. Let's put it this way. And together with them, we are going to build very quickly boutiques, monobrand boutiques. And also, and also corners, those corners which you have in the stores. And then, of course, we will be in multiple showrooms there. So that's going to be a very commercial approach.
So you're canvassing the market. You're going to be everywhere. You're going to be in multi-brand stores. You're going to have some select brand boutiques. You're going to have shop-in-shops at luxury shopping centers. You're just going to be present. You're going to tell them, this is the brand for you. This is the hot Swiss brand today.
Yes, and we are going to be all over the place, and we will be also in communication. We will certainly have spokespeople, which we talk already, because I think, yes, you have to have a global approach, but you have to also act domestically. And there we will have, or we already have signed up some partners who are going to work with people who are famous in the world of India. So that's, of course, that's going to be the very fun part of that venture.
Have you determined anything unique about the consumers in the market? Obviously, every environment has its own business nuances, shipping nuances. But in terms of the consumer, are tastes just as different and diversified in India as everywhere else? Are there specific things that work better or worse in that market? I remember Ulysse and Nardin, for example, Russia. There was certain things that worked really well in Russia, may have not worked outside of Russia.
Yeah, no, I don't know if people who know me, they know that I'm active in India for a long time. Even with Ulysse Nardin, we were one of the strongest brands at that time. And I was involved now in India for a long time. I really dislike when people start to plan product on a local market. I think this is wrong. You have to have on the product a global approach. And I think when you look at our product, which we launched, I think you can or relaunched now or launched in the Geneva Watch Days, from the product, you can say, the handwriting there is not a handwriting for a certain geographical area in the world. There are certain nuances. Exactly. There are certain nuances, and we will take advantage of this if it's going to be India or if it's going to be another market. Yes, you have that. But in general, I think the market has become so global, and it will become even more global. And I think you cannot distinguish anymore in the product in a few years.
So, does that mean that if you're a watch brand, you really need to be thinking about universal appeal? Or is there still something to be said about the local taste? Because I agree with you from a business perspective in a lot of ways, but I actually, from an artistic standpoint, I think it's kind of fun when sometimes products are designed for local taste. It was like those ones with the particular Japanese flavor or something like that, right?
I think that's all cool. I think it's also good. I think it's also very commercial. because that's kind of the easy money, I would call it. If you make a limited edition for the Chinese New Year, for example, why not? But I think the handwriting or the DNA, the message, the image which is out there has to stay global. I think that's probably the most important part.
Is the upward mobility across India in general, or is it really mostly focused on the major metropolitan centers? I'm actually not sure. I'm not an expert enough in the market to know where all the wealth is isolated. I imagine it's mainly the big cities, but I really don't know.
No, I mean, you can call it also tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, and then you have certain pockets there where you have certain places, let's say Hyderabad or so, or Bangalore, where those markets or those cities came up a lot through expatriates as well, because you have new industries coming up, call centers and whatever you have. So you have certain cities that were maybe in the past tier 2, tier 3 cities, and they have become very industrial. But even there, I have to say, and maybe it's a bit controversial what I say now, you have within India, of course, you have also different cultures. So you have different buying habits. For example, you have certain big cities where people buy out of their guts. It's kind of, yes, this is fun, I buy it. And you have the same rich or even more rich people in another city, and there the market is more conservative, and the consumer will go 3-4 times to a shop before he or she buys a timepiece. But that's a worldwide thing. You have that even within Switzerland.
Of course.
Probably the guy in Zurich buys different than the guy in Bern.
I just think it's so interesting because you mentioned earlier in the conversation how you go to the market, you meet with people, and so you learn things, you observe things, and these are all the types of things that you'd be asking yourself as you're going around doing that. So I've just been curious to know what you've been learning on your travels, because these types of little differences, like this person likes to buy this way, or this type of thing just doesn't work in this market, those are the things that make a difference in the brand. And so I love to hear that. But obviously, you're beginning this journey. We're going to have to come back a year from now to see what you've learned, because I want to know what the product's going to make. We're almost out of time. One thing that I want you to say is, for people that love watches, what do you recommend they know or think about as they look at the new Favre Leuba watches? People will be able to read about them on aBlogtoWatch. But talk to the collector right now. You know them. What should they know about your work and the latest crop of watches from Favre Leuba?
I think one thing is, I call it value proposition. I think you really get a great product for what you pay for. And I think this is key, because this has to do with fairness. It's a brand which is not bogus, which means the history is true. The brand was always in business. It's not something which was sleeping for 2 years. There are people behind it that come from the industry. There is also people, the investors. I always talk now about the investors. All the investors who are in that venture, they have a background, industrial or retail, in the watch business. So it's not a financial, motivation behind the brand. Everybody who works in the brand and who has money in the brand, has invested in the brand, has passion for timepieces. And when we sit together and we plan those products, it's always passion. So I think for me, the most important also is, whoever looks into Favre Leuba or any timepiece, they have to enjoy and they have to wear the timepiece. I don't like when people buy timepieces, wherever I worked before, who buy it for the fact of buying it. No, buy it, but enjoy it and use it and wear it. I think, and that's why I also mentioned a few times in this blog, we want to produce wearable timepieces. People you can wear every day. Enjoy it. And it's a price range where you can afford that.
I think what's funny about that is, that seems obvious. Like, of course you need to wear it. But you and I remember a time not so long ago when a lot of watches were just not meant to be worn. They were almost like, very fashionable women's clothing. With like, comfortable? Of course it's not comfortable. It's just meant to look good. And all of a sudden, people started gravitating towards comfort and leisure. And then everyone realized, like, wait a minute, nobody wants to feel pain or discomfort while wearing a timepiece. And everyone rediscovered the comfortable watch. And I think it's really important that now people like yourself and others that are thinking about it, they will reject watches that are not comfortable. And I tried on every single one of the new Favre Leuba watches, and they're comfortable. They're really comfortable. So it's funny that you have to say that these days. Hopefully we won't have to forever. But yeah, we've kind of, not totally, but we've really left that era of the uncomfortable watch coming out of the major brands.
and you know what? At the end of the day, you have to purchase and wear a watch for yourself. You don't do that for anybody else, because you don't want to. Why do you want to show off with a timepiece? You have to wear it and enjoy it for yourself.
Well, you say this easily, but you worked at Watchbox for a while, and they're trying to sell the hot watches here and there. You saw people buy watches not for themselves. And I'm glad that you're reminding people you should, but there is a contingent of people out there, especially on the sales side, who will try to encourage you to buy something because it's popular. And what I hope you're saying, which was I've said, is buy what you like. If it's okay to like a popular watch, but don't like it just because it's popular.
True. You don't want to ask a customer who wears a timepiece, why do you wear that timepiece? And he or she tells you, because somebody else told me I should wear it. Right? That's wrong.
Yeah. Don't be that wearer, folks. Well, we're out of time. I encourage everyone to go to the Favre Leuba website to learn all about the latest things. It sounds like Patrik and his team have a whole assortment of exciting models that are going to be launched as soon as the next 2 years or so. So check out the watches today. Look out for more interesting stuff. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Chairman and CEO of Favre Leuba, Patrik Hoffmann. Patrik, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.